Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Franklin Bearstone, but everyone calls me Frank. I've been a ranger in Georgia's Chattahoochee National Forest for 5 years now, and before that, I flew helicopters in Vietnam. I'm 44 years old, and I thought I'd seen every kind of monster this world could throw at a man. I was wrong. It was November 1976 when everything changed. The leaves had already fallen, leaving the mountains bare and cold. Blood Mountain sits at 4,458 feet, the highest peak on the Appalachian Trail in Georgia, and it gets its name from the red color of the soil and rocks. At least, that's what the tourist books say. The Cherokee who lived here before had a different name for it, Kekla Kudla, which means hairy savage. I wish I'd paid more attention to that back then. The morning started normal enough. Temperature was about 45 degrees, with ice forming in the shadows where the sun couldn't reach. Hunting season was at its peak, and we always had our hands full keeping track of hunters and making sure they stayed safe. The mountains can be dangerous, even without whatever was lurking up there. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when the call came in. A hunter named Bobby Williams hadn't come back from his trip into the Blood Mountain area. His wife was worried sick. Bobby was experienced, knew these woods better than most, and always came back when he said he would. My partner, Joseph Wyndham, and I took the helicopter up to look for him. Joseph was a good man, part Cherokee, and he knew these mountains like they were his backyard. We flew over the thick rhododendron thickets and rocky outcrops, looking for any sign of Bobby or his orange hunting vest. We found him 3 hours later, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. Bobby Williams was hanging 15 feet up in an oak tree, not sitting in a tree stand. Hanging. Something had torn him, apart with claws bigger than a bear's, then somehow got his body up into those high branches. There was blood everywhere, but what made my skin crawl was how neat it all looked, like someone had arranged it on purpose. "Jesus Christ," Joseph whispered over the radio. "What could do something like that?" I'd seen men torn apart by shrapnel in Vietnam, but this was different. This was personal. Whatever killed Bobby Williams had taken its time. We called in the state police and the coroner, but landing the helicopter near that tree was tricky. The mountains around Blood Mountain are full of hidden valleys and old mining tunnels from the 1800s when people came looking for gold. Now they're just dark holes in the earth, and looking down at them from the air always made me nervous. As we waited for the authorities, I walked the area around the base of the tree. That's when I found the first tracks. They were huge, 22 inches long, shaped like a man's foot, but with claw marks at the tips of the toes. And here's the thing that made my blood run cold. They had thumbprints, like hands, but foot-shaped. The stride between tracks was massive, at least 10 feet apart. "Frank," Joseph called from the other side of the clearing. "You need to see this." He was standing at the base of a granite cliff face, staring up at deep gashes in the solid rock. They were fresh, cutting through the stone like it was soft clay. Each mark was about 8 inches long and an inch deep. "No animal I know can do that to granite," Joseph said. I knelt down and put my hand next to one of the claw marks. It was 3 times the size of my fingers. That's when we heard it for the first time. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was like a roar and a scream mixed together, echoing off the mountain walls. It made every hair on my body stand up, and something deep inside my brain started screaming at me to run. The sound lasted maybe 10 seconds, then faded into the cold mountain air. In the silence that followed, I realized something else that should have warned me. There were no birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. The whole mountain had gone dead quiet, like every living thing was holding its breath. "We should get back to the helicopter," Joseph said, and I could hear the shake in his voice. As we walked back through the trees, I kept looking over my shoulder. I had the strangest feeling that something was watching us, tracking our every move. It was the same feeling I'd had in Vietnam when the enemy was close. That prickle on the back of your neck that meant danger. But when I looked back, there was nothing there except bare trees and shadows. We flew Bobby Williams' body out that afternoon, and I tried to convince myself it had been a bear attack. A big bear, maybe one that had gone crazy or gotten into some bad food. The claw marks in the granite, well, maybe the rock was softer than it looked. The impossible height of the body in the tree. Bears can climb, right? I was lying to myself, and I knew it. But after what I'd seen in the war, I needed things to make sense. I needed the world to have rules. I should have listened to the Cherokee stories Joseph's grandfather used to tell. I should have paid attention to the name Kekla Kudla. Most of all, I should have kept every hunter away from Blood Mountain until we figured out what we were dealing with. Instead, I filed a report about a bear attack and went home to a bourbon and a sleepless night, while something ancient and angry settled in to wait for its next victim. 3 days later, the second hunter went missing. This time it was Carl Patterson, a local man who'd been hunting these mountains for 30 years. His truck was found parked at the trailhead, keys still in the ignition, rifle still in the gun rack. His hunting license showed he was heading for the same area where we'd found Bobby Williams. Joseph and I went up in the helico. Picture again, but this time something was different. About a mile from Blood Mountain's peak, the engine started coughing and sputtering. The radio began picking up static, voices talking in languages I didn't recognize, and electronic squeals that made my teeth ache. "This is weird," I said, checking all the gauges. Everything looked normal, but the helicopter was fighting me like it didn't want to go any further. "Maybe we should turn back," Joseph suggested, but I was stubborn. In Vietnam, mechanical problems usually meant enemy fire, and you pushed through them or you died. I figured the same rules applied here. We found Carl Patterson 2 hours later in a place that made no sense at all. He was hanging from a tree, just like Bobby Williams, but this tree was on the edge of a cliff face, suspended over a 200-foot drop. There was no way anyone could have climbed up there, no way to get a ladder or rope close enough. Yet there he was, 15 feet up, torn apart by the same massive claws. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the arrangement. Someone, or something, had taken Carl's hunting gear and arranged it in a perfect circle around the base of the tree. His backpack, his thermos, his extra ammunition, even his sandwich, all placed with mathematical precision. In the center of the circle were more of those impossible footprints, and they led right to the cliff face before disappearing. "How did they get up there?" Joseph asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. I was studying the cliff through binoculars when I saw movement. Just for a second, a shadow against the rock that didn't match the shape of the mountain. Then it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" I kept the binoculars trained on the spot, but whatever I'd seen was gone. "Nothing. My eyes playing tricks on me." We called in the state police again, but getting Carl's body down was going to require special equipment. The tree was too close to the cliff edge for the helicopter to get near, and the only way up was a technical rock climb that would take hours. While we waited for the rescue team, Joseph and I decided to follow the creature's tracks. They led away from the cliff through a thick stand of rhododendron bushes and into a part of the mountain I'd never seen before. The tracks were clear in the soft forest floor, those same massive prints with the thumb marks. But the deeper we followed them, the stranger they became. Sometimes the stride was normal, 10 or 12 feet apart. Other times the prints were 30 feet apart, like whatever made them could jump impossible distances. "Frank," Joseph said, pointing ahead, "look at this." We'd come to a small clearing where several large trees had been broken off about 8 feet from the ground. Not cut, broken. The wood was splintered and twisted, and the trees had been arranged in a deliberate pattern like a fence or barrier. In the center of this wooden wall was an opening, just wide enough for a person to walk through. The ground on either side was torn up, like something huge had been pacing back and forth. "It's like a corral," Joseph said. "Like something was keeping animals penned up in here." I walked to the opening and looked through. On the other side, the forest was different. The trees were older, bigger, and they grew so thick that very little sunlight reached the ground. Everything was covered in a greenish twilight, and the air smelled wrong, not like pine and earth, but like something wild and musky. "We should go back," Joseph said. "Get more men, better equipment." But I was already walking through the opening. My military training kicked in. You scout the enemy position, you gather intelligence, you don't retreat until you know what you're facing. The forest on the other side was dead quiet, just like it had been around Bobby Williams' body. No birds, no insects, no small animals scurrying through the underbrush. The only sound was our boots crunching on the thick carpet of dead leaves. We'd gone maybe 50 yards when we found the cave. It was hidden behind a fallen tree, just a dark opening in the rock that you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. The opening was big, 8 feet tall and twice as wide. Around the entrance, the ground was packed hard, like something heavy had been going in and out for a long time. The smell coming from inside was overpowering. It was like a zoo smell, but worse, wild and rank and dangerous, and underneath it was something else, something metallic that made my stomach turn. "Blood," Joseph whispered. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it into the cave. The beam reached maybe 20 feet before disappearing into darkness, but I could see enough to make my hands shake. The cave was full of bones, not just animal bones, though there were plenty of those. I could see deer skulls, bear ribs, what looked like the remains of a wild boar. But mixed in with the animal bones were pieces of fabric, hunting boots, a rifle stock, and other things I didn't want to identify. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "How many people has this thing killed?" That's when we heard the sound again. That roar scream that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But this time, it was much closer. We ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. We turned around and ran like scared children, crashing through the forest, jumping over fallen logs, not caring about stealth or dignity. Behind us, something was moving through the trees, something big enough to break branches and fast enough to keep up with our panicked flight. I could hear it breathing, deep, raspy breaths that sounded almost human, but not quite. And I could hear its feet hitting the ground, a rhythmic pounding that shook the earth under our boots. We made it back to the helicopter, but just barely. As we lifted off, I looked back, at the tree line, and saw it for the first time. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us go. 12 feet tall, covered in dark reddish fur, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its face was like a nightmare version of a human face, the same basic features, but stretched and distorted and filled with teeth. And its eyes. God help me, its eyes looked intelligent. As we flew away, it raised one massive arm and threw something at us, a rock the size of a basketball that missed the helicopter by inches. If it had connected, we would have gone down. "Did you see that?" Joseph shouted over the noise of the rotors. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "What the hell is that thing?" I didn't answer, because I was starting to suspect that thing wasn't the right word. Whatever was living on Blood Mountain, it wasn't just an animal. It was smart, it was angry, and it was hunting human beings on purpose. And hunting season had just started. Word of the 2 deaths spread fast, but instead of keeping hunters away, it brought more of them. By the end of the week, we had dozens of men with rifles converging on Blood Mountain, all convinced they could bag themselves a record-breaking bear. I tried to get the area closed to hunting, but my supervisor said we didn't have enough evidence. 2 hunting accidents don't make a monster, Frank, he told me. Do your job and keep the panic to a minimum. So Joseph and I did what we could. We set up a command post at the base of the mountain and tried to keep track of who was going up and who was coming back down. We also set traps, big steel cages baited with fresh meat, hoping to catch whatever was killing people. Every morning we'd check the traps and find them destroyed. Not just opened or triggered, completely demolished like something had taken them apart piece by piece. The bait was always gone, but it was taken with what looked like tools, clean cuts through the meat, not tooth marks. It's learning, Joseph said on the 4th day, figuring out how our traps work. That's when I started to get really scared. Bears don't learn trap mechanisms. Mountain lions don't use tools. Whatever was up there had human-level intelligence, maybe better. On Saturday morning, 3 hunters went up the mountain together, Bill Morrison, Dave Tucker, and Jim Henley. They were experienced men, all carrying high-powered rifles and military surplus radios. They checked in every 2 hours like clockwork. Until they didn't. Joseph and I went up in the helicopter at sunset, following their planned route. We found their campsite in a small valley about halfway up the mountain. Their tents were still standing, their fire was still smoldering, and their food was still cooking over the flames. But the men were gone. "It's like they just vanished," Joseph said, walking around the campsite. "No signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing disturbed." I was examining their radio equipment when I found the first clue. The radio was still on, tuned to their frequency, but the microphone cord had been cut with something sharp. Not chewed through. Cut in a straight line. "Joseph," I called. "Over here." He came over and looked at the severed cord. "What kind of animal uses a knife?" That's when we heard Bill Morrison screaming. The sound came from up the mountain, echoing off the rock faces, so we couldn't tell exactly where it originated. It was a sound of pure terror, the kind of scream that reaches down into your soul and twists everything around. We grabbed our weapons and started climbing toward the sound, using our flashlights to navigate the rocky terrain. The screaming continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. We found Bill hanging from a tree, just like the others. But this time we also found Dave and Jim. They were arranged in a triangle around the tree, each man positioned exactly the same distance from the trunk. Our hunting rifles had been taken apart, and the pieces arranged in neat piles next to their bodies. And carved into the ground between them, in letters 3 feet tall, was a single word in Cherokee script. Joseph read it aloud, his voice shaking. "Unelanuhi." "What does it mean?" I asked. "Sacred place," he whispered. "It means sacred place." That's when I realized we weren't dealing with a random killer. This thing, whatever it was defending territory it considered sacred. It wasn't just hunting humans, it was sending a message. The message was simple: stay away. But men with rifles don't listen to messages from monsters, and the next morning brought even more hunters. Word had spread about the bear that could kill 3 armed men, and every would-be hero in North Georgia wanted to claim the prize. Joseph and I spent Sunday trying to coordinate search parties and keep people from wandering off alone. But the mountain was too big, and there were too many hunters. By evening, we had 2 more missing persons reports. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those Cherokee letters carved into the ground, about the intelligence behind the killings, about the way the creature had systematically destroyed our traps. This wasn't some crazed animal. This was something that understood human behavior and was using that knowledge against us. Around midnight, I heard my radio crackle to life. "Frank, you there?" It was Joseph's voice, but something was wrong with it. He sounded different, older somehow, and strangely calm. "I'm here, Joseph. What's your 20? I'm up on Blood Mountain. Frank, you need to come up here, alone." "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" There was a long pause. Then, "I found it, Frank. I found what's been killing people, and it wants to talk." My blood went cold. "Joseph, get out of there. Come back to base and we'll—" "It's not what we thought, Frank. It's not a monster. It's a guardian. It's been here for hundreds of years, protecting the sacred places from people who would destroy them." I could hear something in the back, ground of his transmission, a low rumbling sound, like a diesel engine idling. But there were no roads where Joseph was supposed to be. "Joseph, listen to me. Whatever's up there, it's dangerous. It's killed 7 people in the last week." "The people it killed were hunters," he said, and his voice was getting stranger. "People who came to kill for sport, not for food. People who showed no respect for the mountain or its spirits." "Joseph, you're not making sense. Come back down and we'll talk about this." "I can't do that, Frank. I'm part of it now, part of the mountain. But you can still save the others. You can still stop the killing." The radio went dead. I tried calling him back, but got nothing but static. I tried the emergency frequency, but that was dead too. It was like something was jamming all radio transmissions in the area. I spent the rest of the night pacing my cabin, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct told me to stay away from Blood Mountain, to call in the National Guard and let them deal with whatever was up there. But Joseph was my partner. More than that, he was my friend. I couldn't abandon him. At dawn, I loaded my service pistol, grabbed a rifle and extra ammunition, and started up the mountain alone. I was about to learn that some friendships don't survive what we become in the darkness. I found Joseph 3 hours later sitting cross-legged in a clearing near the summit of Blood Mountain. At first glance, he looked normal. Same clothes, same dark hair, same weathered face. But as I got closer, I could see the changes. His eyes reflected light like an animal's. His fingernails had grown into sharp, curved claws, and when he smiled at me, I could see that his teeth had become pointed fangs. "Hello, Frank," he said, and his voice was the same but different, deeper, with an echo that seemed to come from the mountain itself. I kept my rifle ready but not aimed. "Joseph, what happened to you?" He gestured to the trees around us. "I found what I was meant to find, what my Cherokee ancestors have known for centuries. There are guardians in these mountains, spirits that protect the sacred places from those who would harm them." As he spoke, I became aware that we weren't alone. Something was moving in the shadows between the trees, something large and patient. The smell hit me then, that wild, musky odor I'd detected near the cave. "The creature," I said. "It's here." "He's here," Joseph corrected. "His name is Cataluchi, and he's been the guardian of this mountain for 300 years. The Cherokee knew him, respected him, made offerings to keep him peaceful." "Joseph, that thing has killed 7 people. 7 hunters," he said, and his eyes flashed with something that wasn't entirely human. 7 men who came to kill for sport, who showed no respect for the mountain or its creatures. Cataluchi gave them chances, signs, warnings, reasons to leave. They ignored them all. I could hear it breathing now, somewhere in the trees behind me, slow, deep breaths that made the hair on my arms stand up. "The Cherokee lived alongside Cataluchi for generations," Joseph continued. "They hunted, but only what they needed. They took only what the mountain could spare. They understood that some places are sacred, that some spirits demand respect. And when they were forced off the land?" Joseph's expression darkened. "When the white men came and drove the Cherokee away, Cataluchi was left alone. For decades he watched as miners tore up the mountain looking for gold. He watched as hunters killed everything that moved, just for the sport of it. He watched as sacred places were turned into tourist attractions." I was starting to understand. "So he started fighting back. He started protecting what was left," Joseph said. "At first he tried to scare people away. Strange sounds, broken equipment, glimpses in the forest. But as the hunters became more numerous and more disrespectful, well, he had to become more direct. That's when it stepped out of the trees. Cataluchi was everything I'd seen from the helicopter and more. 12 feet tall, covered in dark red fur that seemed to absorb light. His arms were longer than human proportions, ending in hands that could span a man's chest. His face was almost human, but distorted. The features of a man stretched over the skull of something much larger and older. But it was his eyes that made me understand what Joseph was talking about. They were intelligent, yes, but also infinitely sad, ancient and tired and full of the weight of centuries. "He's not a monster, Frank," Joseph said quietly. "He's the last guardian of a dying world." Cataluchi spoke then, not with words, but directly into my mind. Images flooded my consciousness, the mountain as it was before white settlers, green and alive and full of creatures that no longer existed. I saw Cherokee hunters making offerings before they took game, saw them treating the mountain with reverence and respect. Then I saw what came after, the gold miners with their sluices and explosives, the hunters with their repeating rifles killing deer and bears and birds just to see them fall, the gradual transformation of a sacred place into a commodity. "You see?" Joseph asked, and I realized tears were streaming down my face. But then Cataluchi showed me something else, the hunters who had died over the years, not just the recent ones, but dozens stretching back decades. Men who had families, children, futures. Men who might have been wrong but didn't deserve to die for their ignorance. I understand his pain, I said finally, but I can't let him keep killing people. Joseph's eyes flashed, and for the first time, he looked dangerous. You can't stop him, Frank. He's part of the mountain now. He's eternal. Maybe, I said, raising my rifle. But you're not. What happened next still haunts my nightmares. Joseph leaped at me with superhuman speed, his fingers extended into claws. I got one shot off, catching him in the shoulder and spinning him around, but he barely slowed down. We crashed to the ground together, rolling over rocks and fallen branches. Joseph was stronger than any human had a right to be, but he was still partially human. I managed to get my service pistol out and put 2 rounds in his chest. He looked up at me with those animal eyes, and for just a moment he was my old partner again. Thank you, he whispered, and died. Cataluchi let out a roar that shook the entire mountain. Trees swayed, rocks fell from the cliff faces, and I swear the ground itself trembled with his rage. He turned toward me, and I knew I was about to join Joseph. But then something unexpected happened. An old Cherokee man stepped out of the forest, moving slowly and carefully. He was tiny compared to Cataluchi, but the guardian immediately stopped his advance. The old man began to speak in Cherokee, his voice calm and respectful. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel their power. This was a language that had been spoken on this mountain for 1,000 years. Words that carried the weight of tradition and respect. Cataluchi listened, his massive head tilted to one side. Gradually, his rage seemed to fade. He looked down at Joseph's body, then at me, then back at the old man. The Cherokee elder continued speaking, and I caught one word I recognized. Unelanuhi. Sacred place. Then the old man turned to me and spoke in English. He says you are not like the others. You came not to hunt, but to protect. You killed your friend not from hatred, but from duty. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Cataluchi will spare you, the elder continued, but he wants you to understand something. This mountain is sacred. It always has been, and it always will be. Those who respect it will be protected. Those who abuse it will face his judgment. I looked up at the massive guardian. And the hunters? The ones who are still up here? The elder translated my question, then listened to the response. He says the choice is yours. You can lead them off the mountain safely, but they must never return. If they come back to hunt for sport, to kill without need or respect, he will stop them. And if I can't convince them to leave? The old man's expression was grim. Then he will convince them himself. I understood. Deal. Cataluchi studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. He walked over to Joseph's body, lifted it gently in his massive arms, and disappeared into the forest. The Cherokee elder smiled sadly. Your friend chose his path. He became part of the mountain's protection. In time, perhaps you will understand that it was not entirely a tragedy. Then he too vanished into the trees, leaving me alone on the summit of Blood Mountain, with the weight of an impossible bargain. It took me 6 hours to get all the hunters off the mountain. I told them there had been a gas leak from an old mine shaft, that the area was contaminated and dangerous. Most of them grumbled but packed up their gear and left. A few wanted to argue, but something in my voice convinced them I was serious. Joseph's body was never found. The official report listed him as killed in a fall while conducting a rescue operation. I received a commendation for leading the successful evacuation of 43 hunters from a hazardous area. The truth was a little more complicated. Over the following months, I spent a lot of time researching Cherokee history and talking to tribal elders who were willing to speak with me. I learned that Cataluchi was just one of many guardian spirits that had protected sacred places throughout the Appalachian Mountains. Most of them had faded away as their territories were developed or destroyed, but a few still lingered in the deepest wilderness areas. I also learned that the bargain I'd made was more complex than I'd understood. In Cherokee tradition, guardians like Cataluchi weren't evil. They were necessary. They maintained the balance between human needs, and natural preservation. But that balance required respect, understanding, and most importantly, restraint. The hunters stayed away from Blood Mountain for about a year. Then, inevitably, word spread that the bear problem had been solved, and they started coming back. I did what I could. I established new regulations limiting hunting in the area. I required permits and guides for anyone wanting to hunt near the summit. I made sure that every hunter who entered Keklikudla's territory understood that they were guests in a sacred place. Most of them listened. The ones who didn't, well, hunting accidents happen in the mountains. Slips, falls, getting lost in bad weather. Nothing as dramatic as being hung 15 feet up in a tree, but effective nonetheless. I never saw Keklikudla again, but I knew he was there. Sometimes, while flying helicopter patrols, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the deep forest. Sometimes hunters would report feeling watched or finding their campsites rearranged in subtle ways. Sometimes I'd find small offerings left at the base of certain trees, tobacco, beads, or food left by Cherokee visitors who still remembered the old ways. The mountain found its balance again. The guardian spirits were patient, and most humans could be taught respect. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a workable one. I retired from the Forest Service in 1983, but I still live near the mountains. I've become something of an expert on local folklore, and sometimes people come to me with stories of strange encounters in the deep woods. I listen carefully to every tale, and when I hear something that sounds familiar, I make sure to pass along the proper warnings. Hunt with respect, or don't hunt at all. Some places are sacred, and some guardians never sleep. The Cherokee were right about Keklikudla. He's not a monster. He's a protector. But protectation sometimes requires violence, especially when dealing with those who refuse to learn. Blood Mountain is quiet now, at least most of the time. The tourists hike the Appalachian Trail, the respectful hunters take their deer and go home, and the mountain spirits rest easy in their ancient places. But every November, when hunting season starts again, I listen to the radio frequencies and watch the missing person reports. Because the balance is fragile, and there are always those who think the rules don't apply to them. They learn differently, up there in the high places where the old spirits still walk. They learn that some mountains have long memories, and some guardians never forgive. My name is Franklin Bearstone, and this is what I know to be true. Respect the mountains, or the mountains will teach you respect in ways you won't survive to remember. The Cherokee called it Keklikudla, the hairy savage. But savage isn't the same thing as evil, and sometimes the wild things are the only ones still protecting what's sacred in this world. Remember that, next time you're alone in the deep woods and you feel like something's watching you from the shadows. It probably is. My name is Samuel Redbird, but folks just call me Sam. I've been a ranger here in Daniel Boone National Forest for 2 years now, ever since I came back from Korea in '52. The forest is my medicine, I guess you could say. After what I saw over there, the things war does to children, I needed somewhere quiet to heal my mind. It was October 1954, one of those warm autumn days that makes you forget winter's coming. The leaves were turning gold and red, and the air smelled like wood smoke from the old cabins scattered through these hills. I was checking trail markers near Copper Creek when my radio crackled to life. "Sam, you there?" It was Sheriff Hawkins from town, 45 miles away. His voice sounded tight. "I'm here, Jim. What's the problem?" "Got a missing child, 8-year-old girl named Lucy Brennan. Family says she wandered off from their cabin yesterday evening. They've been searching all night." My stomach dropped. In Korea, I'd seen too many children who never made it home. "I'm on my way," I said, already heading for my truck. The Brennan cabin sat in a small clearing about 5 miles from where I'd been working. The family stood in their yard looking scared and tired. Mrs. Brennan's eyes were red from crying, and her husband kept running his hands through his hair like he didn't know what else to do. "She just vanished," Mrs. Brennan said when I introduced myself. One minute she was playing by the creek, the next, she started crying again. I knelt down next to their son Tommy, who was maybe 10 years old. "Did you see which way Lucy went?" Tommy shook his head, but something in his eyes made me think he was holding something back. She was talking to someone, he said quietly. Who was she talking to? I don't know. I couldn't see them, but I heard her laughing like she was playing with other kids. Mr. Brennan frowned. There aren't any other children around here. The nearest neighbors are 5 miles away. I organized a search party with some local men who knew these woods. We brought tracking dogs and split into groups to cover more ground. The forest felt different that day, too quiet, like the birds and squirrels were hiding from something. We found Lucy's footprints easily enough near the creek, small bare feet in the soft mud. But as we followed them, something strange happened. Other footprints joined hers, lots of them, all children's feet, all bare, all heading deeper into the forest. How many kids we looking for? Asked Bill Henderson, one of the local men. I counted the tracks, at least 6 different sets of prints, maybe more. I thought only one child was missing. That's when old Pete Garrison spoke up. Pete had lived in these hills his whole life, knew every tree and rock. There's stories about this place, he said, his voice low. Stories about children who went missing years ago. Some folks say they're still out here, playing in the woods. I didn't believe in ghost stories. After Korea, I believed in bullets and blood and real things you could touch. But the tracks were real enough, leading us deeper into the forest where the trees grew thick and the sunlight barely reached the ground. The dogs started acting strange around noon. They'd follow the scent trail fine, then suddenly stop and whine, their tails tucked between their legs. They refused to go any further. Never seen them act like this, said their handler, scratching his head. That's when we heard it. Faint at first, like the wind in the trees, but then clearer, the sound of children laughing and playing, echoing through the forest from somewhere ahead of us. Lucy, Mrs. Brennan called out. Lucy, honey, come back! The laughter stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. My hands started shaking, not from fear, but from the memories. In Korea, silence like this usually meant trouble was coming. We keep looking, I said, checking my rifle, but we stay together. As we moved deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The trees seemed to lean in closer, and shadows moved in ways that didn't match the wind. But I pushed those thoughts away. A little girl was missing, and that was all that mattered. I had no idea that before the day was over, everything I thought I knew about the world would change forever. The tracks led us to a place I'd never seen before, even after 2 years of ranging these woods. A clearing surrounded by tall limestone cliffs with cave openings scattered across the rock face like dark eyes watching us. I don't like this, muttered Bill Henderson, but I was already kneeling by the creek that ran through the clearing. The footprints were everywhere here, dozens of them in the soft earth by the water. But something was wrong with them. Some looked fresh, like they'd been made that morning. Others seemed older, partially filled with leaves and debris. And some looked like they'd been pressed into stone that had somehow gone soft and then hardened again. Sam, Pete Garrison called from near one of the caves. His voice was shaky. You need to see this. Inside the cave entrance, someone had left toys, old toys, a wooden doll with a painted face, carved marbles, a tiny wooden horse. But mixed in with them were newer things, a rubber ball, some jacks, a small teddy bear that looked like it could have belonged to Lucy. These old toys, Pete whispered, picking up the wooden doll. My grandmother had ones just like this. Said they belonged to her sister who disappeared in these woods back in 1891. I was about to tell Pete not to touch anything when we heard voices, clear as day, coming from deeper in the cave system. Children's voices, singing some kind of game song I didn't recognize. Lucy? Mrs. Brennan pushed past us toward the sound. Lucy, is that you? The singing stopped. We all stood there listening, but the only sound was water dripping somewhere in the darkness. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the cave. The beam reached maybe 30 feet before the passage curved away into blackness. We're going in, I said, though every instinct told me not to. The cave was bigger than I expected. The main passage opened into a large chamber with several tunnels leading off in different directions. Our footsteps echoed strangely, and I could swear I heard other footsteps echoing back, lighter steps, like children running on stone. "There," Tommy Brennan whispered, pointing to one of the side tunnels. "I see her." We all looked, and for just a second, I could have sworn I saw a flash of blonde hair disappearing around a corner. Lucy had blonde hair. We followed the tunnel, but it split into 3 more passages. The walls were covered with drawings, stick figures holding hands, suns and flowers, the kind of pictures children make. Some looked fresh, drawn in charcoal. Others seemed older, carved right into the stone. "Lucy!" Mrs. Brennan called again. This time we heard an answer. "Mama?" The voice was faint, coming from somewhere ahead, but it sounded wrong somehow, like it was coming from very far away or through water. We pushed deeper into the cave system. The air grew colder, and our breath began to fog. My flashlight beam seemed weaker here, like the darkness was fighting back against the light. That's when I saw them. At first I thought it was just shadows moving at the edge of my light. But then I focused, and there they were. Children. 6 or 7 of them standing in the tunnel ahead of us. They looked normal enough. Kids ranging from maybe 7 to 10 years old, wearing simple clothes. But something was off about them. For one thing, their clothes were all different styles. Some wore overalls and simple dresses like farm kids' furs, decades past. Others had on more modern clothes, and one little girl in the front wore a dress that looked like it came from the 1800s. For another, they were completely silent. No breathing, no shuffling feet, no whispers. Just standing there, watching us with dark eyes that seemed too old for their faces. "Lucy?" Mrs. Brennan called out. "Honey, are you there?" One of the children, a girl with blonde hair who might have been Lucy, raised her hand and waved. But she didn't come forward. None of them did. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and friendly. "We're here to help. Lucy, your mom and dad want you to come home." The children looked at each other, and I heard something that made my blood run cold. They giggled, all of them at the same time, in perfect harmony. The sound echoed off the cave walls until it seemed like 100 children were laughing all around us. Then they turned and ran. We tried to follow, but the tunnels twisted and branched in ways that didn't make sense. Sometimes we'd come to dead ends that I swear had been open passages just moments before. Other times we'd find ourselves back in the main chamber even though we'd been walking straight. "This is impossible," panted Bill Henderson. "These caves don't go where they should go." That's when my radio crackled. Sheriff Hawkins' voice came through broken and full of static. "Sam, another child. Missing. Henderson Farm. Little boy. Same area." The radio cut out completely after that. We were on our own. As we made our way back toward the cave entrance, I caught glimpses of the children again. Always at the edge of my flashlight beam. Always just out of reach. Watching us. Following us. Sometimes I'd hear that singing again, coming from passages we hadn't explored. When we finally emerged from the cave, the sun was setting. We'd been underground for hours, though it had felt like minutes. Mrs. Brennan collapsed to her knees in the clearing, crying. "We'll get her back," I promised, though I had no idea how. "We'll get all of them back." But as we went on, looked back through the darkening forest, I couldn't stop thinking about those children's eyes. Too old, too knowing, like they'd seen things no child should ever see. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just been watching us. They'd been choosing us. 2 more children disappeared that night. 7-year-old Billy Henderson and his 9-year-old sister Mary, from a farm just 3 miles from where we'd been searching. Their parents found empty beds in the morning and tiny footprints leading toward the forest. By noon, I had search parties from 3 counties combing the woods. But instead of finding the missing children, we found more questions, more impossible tracks, More toys left in places no child should have been able to reach, and more sightings. "I saw them clear as day," said Mrs. Tucker, whose farm bordered the forest. 6 or 7 children playing in my back field around dawn. When I went to check on them, they just faded away like morning mist. Old Pete Garrison pulled me aside while the others were organizing search grids. "Sam, I need to tell you something about my great-aunt Martha." "What about her?" "She disappeared in these woods in 1891 when she was 8 years old. My family searched for months, never found a trace." He paused, looking toward the tree line. "But folks kept seeing her. For years afterward. She'd appear at family gatherings, always the same age, always wanting other children to come play with her." I wanted to dismiss Pete's story as old mountain folklore, but I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen in the caves. "The Cherokee who used to live here," Pete continued, "they had stories about children who refused to cross over to the spirit world. Said they got stuck between life and death, always searching for playmates to join them. That afternoon, we went back to the caves with more men and better equipment. This time I brought my old Cherokee friend, Joseph Crow Feather, who lived in town and sometimes helped with tracking. Joseph had served in the Pacific during the war and understood things that most people didn't. The moment Joseph entered the cave system, he stopped. His face went pale, and he started speaking in Cherokee, words I didn't understand, but that sounded like prayers. "What is it?" I asked. "This place is wrong, Sam. The spirits here are trapped, hungry. They feed on the life force of living children to maintain their existence." "You're saying the missing kids are not dead, but not alive either, caught between worlds, like the spirits who took them." As if to prove his point, we heard the singing again, closer this time, and we could make out words. "Come and play, come and stay, never grow old or gray. In our caves, we are saved from the world so sad and mad." The song echoed from multiple tunnels, like the children had spread throughout the cave system. Joseph grabbed my arm. "They know we're here. They're calling to any children in our search party." I looked around and realized with horror that several of our searchers had brought their own kids to help look for the missing ones. Tommy Brennan was there, along with 2 other boys around his age. "Get the children out of here," I ordered. "Now!" But it was too late. Tommy Brennan was walking toward one of the tunnel entrances, his eyes glazed over like he was sleepwalking. Behind him, the other 2 boys followed in a line. "Tommy!" I lunged for him, but he was surprisingly strong. He fought against my grip, reaching toward the darkness where we could all see them now, the spirit children, standing in a circle just inside the tunnel. Lucy was among them, but she looked different, paler, more translucent. "Let me go!" Tommy cried. "They want to play. They said we can play forever and never have to grow up or go to school or do chores." Joseph began chanting in Cherokee, his voice cutting through the children's song. The spirit children faltered, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. But they didn't retreat. Instead, their leader stepped forward. The girl in the old-fashioned dress, the one who must have been the first to be taken. When she spoke, her voice was like an echo of an echo. "You cannot stop us, living ones. We have been here longer than your grandparents' grandparents. We are eternal, we are free, and we are very, very lonely." "You're trapping innocent children," I said, still holding tight to Tommy. "We are saving them," the spirit girl replied, "from growing old, from pain and sorrow, from war and death. In our world, there is only play and laughter." "And what about their families, their parents who love them?" For a moment, the spirit girl's face showed something like sadness. "Love fades, parents die, children grow up and forget how to play. But we never forget. We never leave. We never change." Around her, the other spirit children nodded in unison. I could see Lucy among them, her eyes now as old and knowing as the rest. Joseph stepped forward, still chanting. The temperature in the cave dropped even more, and frost began forming on the walls. These children need to be released, he said in English. Death is natural. Growing up is natural. What you're doing goes against the order of things. The spirit children's song grew louder, angry now instead of playful. The cave walls began to shake, and loose rocks fell from the ceiling. We will have the living children, their leader declared. Tonight, when the moon is dark, we will come for them all. And there is nothing you can do to stop us. Then they vanished, leaving only cold air and the echo of children's laughter. We got out of the caves fast, taking the 3 boys with us. But I could see in Tommy's eyes that part of him was still back there with the spirit children. Part of him wanted to go back. That night, I sat up with my rifle, watching the forest from the porch of the ranger station. Joseph sat beside me, a small fire burning between us where he'd placed offerings of tobacco and sage. They'll come, he said quietly. The spirits grow, stronger as more children join them, and weaker children are easier to take. Around midnight we heard them, the singing drifting through the trees like fog, getting closer. How do we fight ghosts? I asked. Joseph looked at me with tired eyes. The same way you fight anything else that's hurting innocent people. You stand your ground and you don't give up. In the distance, I could see lights moving between the trees, small figures carrying what looked like lanterns, heading toward the town where dozens of families slept with their children. I thought about Korea again, about all the children I hadn't been able to save over there. This time would be different. This time, I wouldn't let them down. The spirit children came for Tommy Brennan first. I was ready for them. Joseph and I had spent the evening placing protective symbols around the Brennan cabin. Cherokee markings carved into trees, salt lines across doorways, burning sage to keep evil spirits away. But when the singing started around 2 a.m., I knew our preparations might not be enough. They appeared at the edge of the forest like a line of pale lights. Dozens of them now, not just the handful we'd seen before. Children from different time periods, all carrying flickering lanterns that gave off no heat. At their head walked the girl in the old-fashioned dress, her eyes glowing softly in the darkness. "Thomas Brennan," she called in that echoing voice, "come out and play." Inside the cabin, I heard Tommy stirring. His parents were holding him down, but he was fighting against them with unnatural strength. "I have to go," he kept saying. "They're waiting for me. They need me." The spirit children began their song again, and this time I could feel its power. It pulled at something deep inside me, some childhood memory of endless summer days and games that never had to end. For a moment, I almost understood why a child would want to go with them. "Sam," Joseph whispered, "I know what we have to do, but you're not going to like it." "Tell me." "We have to go back to the caves, to their source. The girl who leads them. She's been trapped the longest. She's the one keeping the others from moving on. If we can help her find peace, the others will be free to pass over naturally. Maybe. Or maybe they'll just get angry and take every child in the county." Through the window, I could see the spirit children moving closer. Their song was getting louder, and I could hear Tommy screaming inside the cabin as his parents tried to hold him back. "There's something else," Joseph said. "To reach their realm, one of us has to cross over partially, become like them temporarily. It's dangerous. You might not be able to come back." I looked at the spirit children surrounding the cabin, then at the window where I could see the Brennan family fighting for their son's soul. I thought about Lucy and Billy and Mary, trapped forever in that cold space between life and death. "I'll do it." Joseph nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Your Cherokee blood will help protect you. And your experience with death, what you saw in Korea, it prepared you for this, whether you know it or not." He pulled out a small leather pouch and handed it to me. "This is sacred earth from the burial ground of my ancestors. It will anchor you to the living world. Don't lose it." The spirit children were almost at the cabin now. I could see Tommy's face pressed against the window, his eyes reflecting that same otherworldly light. Joseph began chanting, his voice rising above the children's song. The air around us shimmered, and I felt something shift inside me. The world became brighter and darker at the same time, like someone had adjusted the contrast on a photograph. "Go," Joseph said. "I'll hold them here as long as I key." On. I ran toward the forest, and the spirit children turned to follow me. Good. If they were chasing me, they couldn't take Tommy. The caves looked different now. The stone walls glowed with a faint light, and I could see passages that hadn't been there before. The spirit children's realm was overlapping with the physical world, and I was caught between them. I found them in the deepest chamber, a vast space that seemed to stretch beyond what should have been possible inside the mountain. All of them were there, not just the ones who'd been at the cabin, but dozens more. Children from every decade since the 1890s, all frozen at the age they'd been when they crossed over. They were playing games in circles, but the games never ended. I watched one group play tag for what felt like hours, but no one was ever it for long. Another group played Ring Around the Rosie, falling down and getting up and falling down again in an endless loop. "You came," said the leader girl, appearing beside me without warning. "I knew you would. You're different from the others." "I came to take the children home. This is their home now. Look how happy they are." I looked closer at the playing children and realized she was wrong. They weren't happy. They were desperate. Their laughter had an edge of hysteria to it, and their eyes were filled with a sadness so deep it made my chest ache. "They want to stop," I said. "They want to rest. If they stop playing, they fade away completely. This is the only way they can exist. Existing isn't the same as living." The girl's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like what she really was, a frightened child who'd been lost for over 60 years. "I don't know how to let them go," she whispered. "I've forgotten how to die." I knelt down so I was at her eye level. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah McKinnon. I was 8 when I got lost in the woods. My mama told me to stay close to the cabin, but I saw a butterfly and I followed it and I got turned around and I couldn't find my way home and I was so scared and cold, and then the OT. Her children found me and they said I could stay with them forever and never be scared or cold again." The words poured out of her in a rush, like she'd been waiting decades to tell someone her story. "Sarah," I said gently, "your mama has been waiting for you. She passed on years ago, but she's still waiting. All the other children's families are waiting too. But if we leave here, we'll disappear. We'll be nothing." "No," I said, thinking of my Cherokee grandmother's stories about the spirit world. "You'll be with the people who love you. You'll be free." Around us, the other children had stopped playing and were listening. I saw Lucy step forward, then Billy and Mary Henderson. Their forms were more solid than the others. They'd been here the shortest time. "I want to see my mama," Lucy said in a small voice. "Me too," whispered Billy. Sarah looked around at all the children she'd been protecting and leading for so long. "But who will take care of them if I go?" "They don't need taking care of anymore," I said. "They need to be at peace." I stood up and pulled out Joseph's pouch of sacred earth. "This will help you find the way. All of you." I scattered the earth in a circle around us, and immediately the cave filled with warm light. Not the cold glow of the spirit realm, but something warmer, kinder. In the light, I could see them, the families of the lost children, reaching out with love and welcome. Sarah's mother, looking just as young and beautiful as the day she'd died. The Henderson children's grandparents, who'd passed years before. Lucy's great-grandmother, who'd died when Lucy was a baby, but who'd been watching over her all this time. One by one, the spirit children walked toward the light. Some were eager, running toward the families they could finally see again. Others were scared, but they went anyway, helped along by the children who'd already found their courage. Sarah was the last to go. She looked back at me with gratitude and something like peace in her ancient young eyes. "Thank you for helping us remember," she said. Then she walked into the light, and it faded, taking the impossible cave system with it. I found myself sitting in a small, normal cave, holding an empty leather pouch. Outside, I could hear Joseph calling my name. The missing children were found safe the next morning, sleeping peacefully in their own beds with no memory of where they'd been. Lucy Brennan woke up asking for breakfast like nothing had happened. Billy and Mary Henderson were back in their rooms, and their parents never did figure out how they'd gotten there. The caves were just caves again, limestone formations with no unusual properties. The toys we'd found were gone, and the strange passages had collapsed or maybe never existed at all. But I knew what had really happened. And so did Joseph. "The spirits found peace," he told me a few days later as we sat by Copper Creek, watching the water flow over the rocks. "That's a good thing you did, Sam." "Is it over?" Joseph was quiet for a long moment. "Here, yes. But there are other places like this. Other children who got lost between worlds. The Cherokee elders used to know how to help them, but that knowledge has been mostly forgotten. Then we'll remember it again. That was 20 years ago now. I'm still a ranger, though I cover a wider territory these days. I've learned the old Cherokee ways from Joseph and other elders, and I've helped lost spirits find their way home in dozens of places throughout the Appalachians. Most people don't know about this work. They see me as just another park ranger who's unusually good at finding lost hikers and camping. But parents in these mountains sometimes seek me out when their children start talking about invisible playmates or when kids go missing in ways that don't make sense. I always tell them the same thing I'm telling you now. If your children talk about other kids who want them to come play in the woods, especially near old cave systems or abandoned settlements, don't ignore it. Sometimes the dead need our help to move on, but sometimes they just want company for their loneliness. And loneliness can be the most dangerous thing of all. The forest is beautiful, but it remembers everything that's happened in it. Every lost soul, every tragedy, every moment of joy and sorrow. Most of the time, that's just part of the natural cycle of life and death. But sometimes, when a spirit is too young or too scared to let go, it holds on to the world of the living. And when that happens, it takes someone who understands both worlds to help them find peace. I keep the sacred earth in my truck now, along with my other ranger equipment. You never know when you might need to help a lost child find their way home, even if that child died 60 years ago. The mountains are quiet tonight, and the creek flows clear and clean. Somewhere in these hills, families sleep peacefully in their cabins, their children safe in their beds. And somewhere else, in a place beyond the living world, other children play eternal games of joy instead of desperation, finally free to grow up into the light. That's worth losing a little sleep over. That's worth remembering. My name is James Crowfeather, but everyone calls me Jimmy. I've been a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, illegal campers, even the occasional moonshiner still trying to work the deep hollows. But nothing prepared me for what happened in Cataluchi Valley that October. I'm part Cherokee, part Scottish, which makes me a real mountain mutt according to my late wife, Sarah. She used to tease me about having one foot in two worlds, and maybe that's what saved my life. My grandfather taught me the old Cherokee ways before he passed, but I never put much stock in the spirit stories. I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see, touch, and measure. The Smokies are my home. I was born in Gatlinburg before it turned into a tourist trap, back when you could still find families who remembered the old days. My job keeps me mostly in the backcountry, away from the crowds. I know every trail, every creek, every forgotten homestead foundation. At least I thought I did. October 1967 was turning cold early. The leaves were already falling, painting the mountains in reds and golds that took your breath away. Most tourists had gone home, leaving the park to us rangers and the wildlife. That's how I liked it. The quiet months let me focus on the real work, maintaining the trails, checking the old historic sites, making sure everything was ready for winter. Cataluchi Valley was one of my favorite spots. It sits up at 4,000 feet, surrounded by thick hardwood forest and rhododendron thickets we call hells because they're so dense you can barely push through them. Before the park was created in the 1930s, whole families lived up there. The government bought them out or forced them out, depending on who you ask. Now all that's left are some old cabin foundations and a few stone chimneys reaching up through the trees like fingers. I live alone in a Park Service cabin about 5 miles from the main valley. Sarah died in a car wreck 4 years ago, and I never remarried. The mountains are good company most of the time. They don't judge you, don't expect conversation, just let you be. On clear nights, I can see the stars better than anywhere else in the world. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. A group of college kids from the University of Tennessee had been camping in Cataluchi over the weekend. They reported seeing lights in the abandoned settlement area after dark. Not campfires or flashlights, but steady yellow light coming from the windows of cabins that shouldn't have windows anymore. Probably just other campers, my supervisor said. But go check it out. Take the new girl with you. The new girl was Patricia Youngblood, a recent transfer from Yellowstone. She was about 30, blonde, tough as nails, and didn't seem impressed by much. I liked her right away. She reminded me of Sarah in some ways. Smart, independent, not afraid of hard work. Ever been to an old settlement site? I asked as we loaded our gear. A few, she said. Usually just foundations and maybe a chimney or two. What's special about this one? Cataluchi was bigger than most, had a school, a church, maybe 40 families at one time. The last ones left in 1938, but some of the buildings were still standing into the 50s. We drove as far as we could, then hiked the last 2 miles. The trail wound through stands of old-growth trees that had somehow survived the logging. Chestnuts, mostly dead from the blight, stood like gray monuments among the oaks and maples. The only sound was our boots crunching through fallen leaves and the occasional call of a crow. "It's quiet up here," Patricia said. "Wait until winter. Then it gets really quiet." But as we got closer to the settlement, I noticed something odd. It was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed muffled. I'd been in these mountains long enough to know that complete silence usually meant trouble. The Palmer cabin sat in a small clearing, just like I remembered it. The roof had fallen in years ago, and ivy covered most of the stone chimney. But something was different. Fresh-cut firewood was stacked neatly beside the front door. Wood that had been split with an axe, not a modern log splitter. "That's new," I said, taking out my camera. Patricia walked around the woodpile, examining it closely. "These are hand-split. Look at the tool marks. And this wood is dry, like it's been seasoned." I took pictures from different angles. Park regulations were strict about camping in historic areas, but more importantly, I was worried about fire danger. October was dry season, and an unattended campfire could burn thousands of acres. "Hello," I called out. "Park Service? Anyone here?" No answer. But I had the strange feeling we were being watched. We checked inside the cabin ruins. The floor was mostly gone, just bare earth and scattered stones. But in one corner, I found something that made my skin crawl. Fresh vegetables, corn, beans, and squash, laid out on what looked like an old wooden table. The vegetables should have been black with frost, but they looked like they'd been picked that morning. "Jimmy," Patricia called from outside. "Come look at this." She was standing by an old clothesline stretched between 2 trees. Hanging from it were shirts, dresses, and overalls. The clothes looked handmade, the kind women sewed in the 1920s and 1930s. But they were clean and dry despite the rain we'd had 2 days ago. I checked my compass, and the needle was spinning like a top. "Magnetic ore in the ground," I said, but I didn't believe it. I'd been all over this area before, and my compass always worked fine. We spent the rest of the afternoon checking other cabin sites. At each one, we found similar things: fresh firewood, clean clothes, vegetables that should have been dead. At the old Whitlock place, we found something that really shook me up. Behind the cabin was a small family cemetery, maybe a dozen graves marked with hand-carved wooden headstones. But some of the graves looked fresh, with mounded earth and new wooden markers. The dates carved into the wood ranged from 1934 to 1966. "That's impossible," Patricia said. This place was abandoned in the 30s. I read the names on the markers: Whitlock, Palmer, Caldwell, Morrison, all families that had lived in Cataluchi before the park was created. But according to our records, they'd all left or died decades ago. The temperature dropped as we stood there, even though the sun was still up. Fog started rolling in from the valley, thick and gray, and moving against the wind. My radio crackled with static, and for just a moment I thought I heard voices speaking in the old mountain dialect my grandfather used to speak. "We should head back," I said. Patricia nodded, but she kept looking over her shoulder as we walked away. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "Children laughing, like they were playing somewhere in the trees." I hadn't heard anything, but the hair on my arms was standing up. As we reached the main trail, our truck engine started running rough, coughing and sputtering like it was getting bad gas. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those fresh graves and the clothes on the line. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe some local families were using the old sites for hunting camps. Maybe they had permission I didn't know about. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I called the park office and asked them to check the permit records. No camping or hunting permits had been issued for Cataluchi in over a month. No one was supposed to be up there. The next morning, I looked tired. "Bad dreams," she said when I asked. "I kept dreaming I was living in one of those old cabins. It seemed so real. I could smell wood smoke and cornbread baking. Just stress," I told her. "New job, strange place. It takes time to adjust." But I was worried. In 16 years of ranger work, I'd never seen anything like what we'd found, and I'd never had a partner start having dreams about a place after just one visit. We drove back up to Cataluchi that afternoon, this time with better equipment. I brought a camera with a telephoto lens and extra film. Patricia brought a tape recorder to document anything unusual we might hear. The silence hit us again as soon as we left the truck. Not even the sound of our own breathing seemed to carry properly. And there was something else, a smell in the air, faint but unmistakable, wood smoke, just like Patricia had dreamed about. We found the source of the smoke at the Morrison cabin, halfway up the ridge. Gray wisps were rising from the stone chimney, and through the empty window frames I could see a warm orange glow like firelight. "Someone's definitely here," Patricia whispered. I called out again, but got no answer. We approached the cabin carefully, and I peered through one of the windows. Inside, a fire was burning in the fireplace. A cast-iron pot hung over the flames, steam rising from whatever was cooking inside. But there was no one there. The front door was open, hanging crooked on old leather hinges. I stepped inside, and the temperature rose 20 degrees. The cabin felt lived in, not like a ruin, but like someone had just stepped out for a few minutes. There were quilts on a handmade bed, dishes on a rough wooden table, and children's toys scattered on the floor. Everything looked exactly like it would have in the 1930s, except it was all clean and well-maintained. "This is impossible," I said, taking pictures as fast as I could. "These buildings have been empty for 30 years. Patricia was standing by the table, staring at a half-finished meal. Cornbread, beans, and what looked like fresh milk in a glass jar. "Jimmy," she said quietly, "someone just ate this. It's still warm." That's when we heard the voices. They came from outside, speaking in the old mountain dialect. A man's voice, deep and rough, and a woman answering him. They were talking about the weather, about bringing in the last of the corn before the frost hit. We crept to the window and looked out. There, working in a garden plot that hadn't existed an hour before, were two people. The man was tall and lean, wearing overalls and a wool shirt. The woman wore a long dress and had her hair pinned up under a bonnet. They moved normally, talked normally, seemed completely real, except they cast no shadows. I grabbed Patricia's arm and pulled her back from the window. My hands were shaking as I changed the film in my camera. "Did you see?" she started to ask. "Yeah, I saw." We watched them work for maybe 10 minutes. The man dug potatoes from the ground while the woman picked the last green tomatoes. They never looked toward the cabin, never seemed to notice us at all. Finally, the woman straightened up and called out, "Ezra, you best come eat 'fore it gets cold." The man nodded and shouldered his hoe. They walked toward the cabin. and as they got closer, I could see them more clearly. The woman was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and pale skin. The man looked older, 40 or so, with a thick beard. They walked right past our hiding spot by the window. I held my breath, sure they would see us, but they looked straight ahead like we weren't there. "Come on," the woman said as they reached the door. "Sarah's got supper waiting." Then they were gone. Not gone like they'd walked away. Gone like they'd never been there at all. The garden plot was back to weeds and bare ground. The voices stopped. Patricia was breathing hard beside me. What just happened? Before I could answer, we heard a child's voice from behind the cabin. "Mama, Papa, come see what I found." A little girl, maybe 6 years old, came running around the corner. She had blonde curls and wore a simple cotton dress. In her hands was a doll made from corn husks. She stopped right in front of the window where we were hiding and looked directly at us. "Who are you?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came out. The little girl tilted her head, studying us with bright blue eyes. "You ain't from around here," she said. "You dress funny." Patricia stepped forward. "What's your name, honey?" "I'm Mary Morrison. This is my papa's place." She held up the doll. "Mama made this for me. Ain't she pretty?" "Very pretty," Patricia said. "Where are your mama and papa now?" "Inside, having supper. You want some? Mama always makes too much." I found my voice. "That's very kind, but we can't stay." Mary nodded solemnly. "You ain't ready yet. But you will be. The mountain takes care of its own." She turned and skipped toward the cabin door. Halfway there, she faded away like smoke. We stood there for a long moment, not speaking. Finally, Patricia said, "I think we should go back to town." "Yeah, I think you're right." But as we walked back to the truck, I noticed Patricia kept looking back toward the cabin, and when we passed the cemetery, she stopped. "Jimmy, look at that." There was a new grave, fresh dug, with a wooden marker that read, "Mary Morrison, 1924 to 1936, beloved daughter." I checked my watch. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, but the sun was already setting behind the mountains. Time seemed wrong up here, like the normal rules didn't apply. That night I drove into Gatlinburg to talk to some of the old-timers at Murphy's General Store. Most of them remembered when the families left Cataluchi. "The government gave them a choice," said Bill Murphy, whose grandfather had run a store up there. "Sell and leave, or lose everything." Most folks sold and moved to town, but some of the older families, the ones who'd been there the longest, they said they'd rat. Her die, then leave. What happened to them? Bill shrugged. Government said they all left by 1938. But my daddy always claimed some of them never came down from the mountain. Said they disappeared into the deep hollows rather than be forced out. You ever hear stories about people still living up there? Oh, sure. Folks used to trade with them into the 50s. Bring them supplies, get crafts and such in return. But that stopped after a while. Most people figured they'd all died off. I bought a bottle of whiskey and drove home, but I couldn't get warm no matter how much I drank. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw that little girl asking who we were. The next morning, Patricia didn't show up for work. I called her cabin, but got no answer. By noon, I was worried enough to drive over and check on her. Her truck was in the driveway, but the cabin was empty. Her bed hadn't been slept in, and her clothes were still in the dresser. But on the kitchen table, I found a note written in handwriting that wasn't hers. "Gone to help with the harvest. Back soon. Don't worry." The handwriting was old-fashioned, the kind they taught in schools 50 years ago. I knew where she'd gone. The drive to Cataluchi took forever, or maybe it just felt that way. I kept the radio on, trying to stay connected to the normal world, but all I got was static. As I got closer to the valley, even that faded away. I found Patricia at the Morrison cabin, working in that impossible garden. She was wearing an old-style dress and had her hair pinned up just like the woman we'd seen. When I called her name, she looked up with a smile I'd never seen before. "Jimmy, you came to help." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Granny Whitlock said you would." "Patricia, we need to go, right now." She laughed. "Go? Why would I go? This is the harvest. Everyone has to help." That's when I saw them. People weeped out, working all through the valley. Men digging potatoes, women picking apples, children carrying baskets. Dozens of them, maybe more. All wearing clothes from the 1930s, all moving with that strange, shadowless quality. And they were all dead. I could see it now, maybe because I wasn't trying to deny it anymore. Their skin was too pale, their eyes too bright. They moved like people, talked like people, but they were spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call them. Patricia, look at me. Really look at me. What year is it? She blinked, confused for a moment. Why, it's 1936, of course. The year of the big harvest. No, it's 1967. You're a park ranger. You have a job in the real world. Her face went blank, then filled with anger. The real world? This is the real world. This is where I belong. An old man approached us from the direction of the cemetery. He was tall and gaunt, with white hair and eyes like chips of ice. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. You must be the other ranger, he said. I'm Ezra Whitlock. Welcome to Cataluchi. This place was abandoned 30 years ago, I said. Ezra smiled, showing teeth that were too white, too sharp. Abandoned? Son, these mountains have been our home for 5 generations. We ain't never leaving. You're dead, all of you. This whole settlement died out decades ago. His smile faded. Dead? We're more alive than anyone down in that valley of yours. We take care of each other here. We preserve the old ways. And sometimes we invite special people to join us. He gestured toward Patricia, who was back to working in the garden. She understands. She knows what's important. Family, community, staying where you belong. I pulled out my grandfather's medicine bag, something I'd carried for years but never really believed in. Inside were tobacco, sage, and a few other things he'd told me were for protection. Cherokee, Ezra said, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. I should have known. Your people always were trouble. I started sprinkling the tobacco on myself in a circle, saying the protection prayer my grandfather had taught me. It was in Cherokee, a language I barely remembered, but somehow the words came easily. The spirits stopped working and turned toward us. Their faces were no longer human, just gray shapes with 2 bright eyes and hungry mouths. You can't take her, Ezra said. She chose to stay. She belongs to us now. Patricia, I called out. Remember who you are. Remember your real life. She looked up from the garden, and for a moment I saw confusion in her eyes. Jimmy? What's happening? I feel so strange. I pulled out my camera and took a flash picture of the crowd around us. In the bright light, the spirits showed their true forms, rotted faces, torn clothes, bodies that had been dead for 30 years or more. Patricia screamed. The spell broke. She could see them as they really were, and the horror of it snapped her back to reality. She ran toward me, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her into the circle of tobacco. Ezra let out a roar of rage that shook the trees. You can't leave! Nobody leaves! The spirits closed in around us, their faces twisted with fury. But they couldn't cross the circle of tobacco. My grandfather's protection was holding, barely. How do we get out of here? Patricia asked. Run, I said. When I say go, run for the truck and don't look back. I threw the sage into the air and said another prayer, this one asking my ancestors for help. The wind picked up, scattering the spirits like leaves. In that moment of confusion, we ran. Behind us, the entire settlement erupted in screams of rage and despair. The ground shook, trees fell, and the air filled with the sound of 100 voices crying out in loss and fury. We made it to the truck, and I gunned the engine, not caring about the rough trail. I just wanted to get as far from Cataluchi as possible. We didn't speak yet until we were back on the main road with electric lights and radio towers visible in the distance. What were they? Patricia asked. Families who wouldn't leave when the government created the park. They died rather than go, and now they're trapped there, still living like it's 1936. And they wanted me to stay. They feed on the living. That's how they stay strong enough to maintain the illusion. If you'd stayed much longer, you would have died and become one of them. Patricia was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I could feel it. The pull. Part of me wanted to stay. It felt so peaceful, so simple. Like I belonged there. I understood. The Hollow Folk offered something the modern world couldn't. A place where time stood still, where nothing ever changed, where you never had to face loss or uncertainty again. But it came at the price of your life, your soul, your future. The Park Service transferred both of us within a week. Patricia went to the Grand Canyon, I went to Yellowstone. Officially, we'd suffered from altitude sickness and exposure, leading to shared hallucinations. The incident report mentioned possible gas leaks from old mining operations. Cataluchi Valley was closed to public access indefinitely due to structural instability in historic buildings. But I knew the truth, and so did a few others. The Hollow Folk were still there, waiting for the next visitor who might be drawn into their endless harvest season. On certain foggy October nights, hikers still reported seeing lights in the abandoned settlement and hearing voices speaking in the old mountain dialect. I never went back, but I kept in touch with other rangers in the area. The reports continued. Campers who disappeared for days and came back with no memory of where they'd been, children who claimed to have played with other children in empty valleys, photographers whose cameras malfunctioned near certain historic sites. Patricia retired early and moved to Arizona. She never talked about what happened, but she sent me a letter once that simply said, I still dream, about the harvest. Sometimes I miss it. I understood. Part of me missed it too. The simplicity, the sense of belonging, the promise that nothing would ever change. But I'd seen the price of that peace, and I knew it was too high. I started taking my grandfather's teachings more seriously after that. I learned the old stories, the protection prayers, the ways to recognize when the spirit world was bleeding into the living world. The Cherokee had always known that some places are thin between worlds, where the dead can touch the living. The Smoky Mountains are full of such places. Cataluchi is just one of them. If you ever find yourself in the backcountry and come across an old settlement that seems too well preserved, too peaceful, too welcoming, leave. Don't stay to investigate. Don't try to take pictures. Don't listen to the voices calling you to join their eternal harvest. Some families never leave the mountains, even in death, and they're always looking for new members to join their hollow community, where the seasons never change and the living become the dead, without ever noticing the difference. Trust me on this one. I've seen what happens to people who stay too long in places where time stands still. The mountains remember everything, and some things should stay buried in the past, no matter how peaceful they seem. My name is Marcus Steelridge, but everyone calls me Mac. I've been a park ranger for 8 years now, ever since I got back from Vietnam. That war taught me plenty about monsters, the kind that walk on 2 legs and carry guns. But it also taught me that most scary stories are just that, stories. Real monsters don't hide in caves or forests. They hide in foxholes and villages, wearing uniforms just like yours. At least, that's what I believed until February 1973. I was working the Blackwater Falls area of Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. Beautiful country, even in winter. The falls freeze solid this time of year, creating these massive ice walls that look like something from another world. The whole area sits high up in the mountains, covered in thick forests of hemlock and spruce. It's the kind of place that makes you feel small. That winter was brutal, the worst anyone could remember. We had 4 feet of snow on the ground and temperatures hitting 15 below zero. The phone lines were down thanks to an ice storm the week before. Most of the mountain towns were cut off, running low on supplies and waiting for spring. I didn't mind the isolation. After what I'd seen in the jungle, the quiet mountains felt like medicine for my soul. My wife had left me 2 years back, took our daughter Sarah with her, said I'd come back from the war different. She wasn't wrong. The silence up there helped me think clearer than I had in years. But that morning, Sheriff Hawkins drove up in his patrol car, chains rattling on his tires. His face was grim. "Mac, I need your help with something strange." I poured him coffee from my thermos. Strange how? Mining crew up at the old Seneca shaft found tracks yesterday. Big ones, 20 inches long, pressed deep into frozen ground. He pulled out a Polaroid photo. They're saying it looks like footprints. I studied the picture. 5 toes, but the proportions were all wrong. Too wide, too long. The stride length between prints suggested something 8 feet tall or bigger. Could be a bear, I said, though I didn't believe it. That's what I thought. Until 3 loggers went missing near the same area. Last radio contact, they reported hearing screaming from inside the mine. I felt that old familiar knot in my stomach, the same one I'd gotten in Vietnam right before everything went to hell. When do we go up there? Soon as you're ready. I'm pairing you with Danny Fairmont. Kid's green, but he knows these mountains. I gathered my gear, military-grade flashlights, rope, first aid kit, and my service revolver. Old habits from the war. Always be prepared for the worst. The drive up took an hour through winding mountain roads. Danny was waiting at the mine entrance, stamping his feet to keep warm. He was maybe 25, eager and nervous. Reminded me of some of the younger soldiers in my unit. Ranger Steel Ridge, I've heard stories about you. They say you tracked down that black bear that killed the camper last summer. Just doing my job, son. The Seneca mine had been abandoned since the 1920s. The entrance was blocked with rusted steel barriers, but something had torn through them like tissue paper. Twisted metal lay scattered in the snow. Jesus, Danny whispered. What could do this? I knelt down, studying the damage. The steel supports were bent and twisted, showing claw marks in the solid rock. Whatever did this was strong. Stronger than any bear. Let's take a look inside, I said, clicking on my flashlight. The beam seemed dimmer than usual as we stepped into the mine. The air was warmer here, flowing up from deep underground. My compass started spinning wildly. That's when I noticed something else. The forest around us was completely silent. No bird calls, no small animal track. It was in the snow. Even the scavengers had cleared out. In Vietnam, we called it the hush, that moment when the jungle went quiet right before an ambush. I should have turned around right then. The mine tunnels stretched deeper than I expected. Our footsteps echoed strangely, the sound bouncing off walls in ways that made distance impossible to judge. Danny stayed close behind me, his breathing quick and nervous. How far back does this thing go? He asked. Old records say maybe 2 miles. This whole mountain is honeycombed with shafts and chambers. We'd gone maybe 100 yards when I found the first set of tools. Crude spears made from mining equipment. Drill bits lashed to support cables with strips of leather. Someone, or something, had crafted these with intelligence and purpose. Could be the missing loggers, Danny suggested. Maybe they armed themselves. I wanted to believe that. But the craftsmanship was too primitive, like something from the Stone Age, and the leather strips looked old, weathered. We pressed deeper. Our radios had stopped working completely, just static and interference. The compass was useless now, spinning like a child's toy. Even our flashlights seemed weaker, as if the darkness was fighting back. That's when we found the first body. It was wedged in a side passage, what was left of it. Tom Mackenzie, one of the missing loggers. I recognized his red flannel shirt and work boots. But the rest... Don't look, I told Danny, but it was too late. The body had been torn apart by something with massive jaws. Teeth marks scored the bones, showing a bite radius I'd never seen before. And the strange thing was, it looked like the meat had been stripped away carefully, methodically. Danny lost his breakfast right there in the tunnel. I couldn't blame him. I'd seen plenty of death in Vietnam, but this was different. This was predatory. Hungry. We need to get out of here, Danny said, wiping his mouth. Not yet. 2 more men are missing. We found evidence of them deeper in the mine, scattered belongings, torn clothing, and more of their teeth marks on the tunnel walls. Whatever lived down here was big enough to leave claw marks in solid rock. The tunnels branched and split like a maze. We followed the main passage, marking our path with chalk. The air grew warmer as we descended, carrying a smell I recognized from the war. the sweet, sick odor of rotting flesh. That's when we heard the breathing. It echoed from somewhere ahead of us, deep and rhythmic like a sleeping giant. Each exhale seemed to shake the walls. Danny grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with fear. "That's not human," he whispered. I drew my revolver, though I doubted 6 bullets would stop whatever was making that sound. We crept forward, flashlight beams dancing ahead of us. The main tunnel opened into a vast chamber, carved out by decades of mining. Our lights couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. But in the center of the space, we could see bones. Dozens of human skeletons arranged in careful patterns around a nest of torn fabric and shiny objects. And in the nest, 2 glowing yellow eyes opened and stared right at us. The breathing stopped. For a moment, the only sound was our own heartbeats thundering in our ears. Then something massive shifted in the darkness. I caught a glimpse of pale skin, impossibly long limbs, and teeth like yellowed daggers. "Run," I said quietly. We turned and sprinted back through the tunnels, our footsteps echoing like gunshots. Behind us, something roared, a sound like breaking glass mixed with a dying scream. It was following us, moving through the darkness with footsteps that shook the ground. Danny stumbled and went down hard. I hauled him to his feet, but he was limping badly. His ankle was twisted, maybe broken. "Go," he gasped. "Leave me." Like hell. I half carried him through the twisting passages, following our chalk marks back toward daylight. The thing behind us was getting closer. I could hear its claws scraping against stone, its breathing growing louder. We burst out of the mine entrance just as the sun was setting. The cold mountain air hit us like a slap, but I'd never been so happy to feel winter wind. Danny collapsed in the snow, exhausted and in pain. "What was that thing?" he asked. I stared back at the dark mouth of the mine. Something was moving just inside the entrance, staying in the shadows. "I don't know, but it's still down there." We made camp that night in an abandoned ranger station about a mile from the mine. Danny's ankle was sprained, not broken, but he couldn't walk far. I radioed for backup, but the interference was worse than ever. All we got back was static. "Tell me about the local legends," I said as we sat by the fire. Danny looked uncomfortable. "My grandmother used to tell stories, old Seneca tales about giants that lived in the mountains. She called them Yahoo, but the white settlers had another name." "Which was?" "Wendigo." He said it quietly, like the word itself had power. "Cannibalistic spirits that were once human. They say if you eat human flesh, especially during a harsh winter, the Wendigo curse takes you, makes you grow huge and strong, but always hungry, always hunting." I'd heard similar stories in Vietnam from some of the local guides. Every culture seemed to have legends about people who crossed the line into something inhuman. "Just stories," I said. But that night, I dreamed of yellow eyes and the sound of breaking bones. The next morning, Danny was different. He woke up before dawn, pacing around our small camp like a caged animal. His eyes were bloodshot, and he kept licking his lips. "I'm starving," he said. "When did we last eat?" We'd had MREs just 6 hours ago, but I didn't argue. I heated up some canned beans over our portable stove. Danny wolfed them down like he hadn't eaten in days, then asked for more. "We need to go back down there," he said suddenly. "Danny, that thing almost killed us." "But we left the other loggers. What if they're still alive?" I studied his face. There was something intense in his expression, almost fevered. "We'll wait for backup. Should be here by noon." But noon came and went with no sign of help. The radio was completely dead now, not even static. And Danny was getting worse. He'd eaten everything we had and was still complaining of hunger. "I found something," he said, returning from a walk around the station. He held up a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Giant Creature Terrorizes Miners, 1894. The story described attacks on mining camps, workers found torn apart, and sightings of a massive humanoid creature in the mountains. "There are more," Danny said, pulling out additional clippings. Every 20 to 30 years, something like this happens. Always in winter, always near the mines. I studied the articles. The descriptions were consistent. Enormous footprints, superhuman strength, and victims found partially eaten. The attacks would go on for a few months, then stop for decades. It's hibernating, I realized. Or dormant somehow. The mining operations disturb it, wake it up. Danny nodded eagerly. And when it's hungry, it hunts. But here's the thing. Look at the victim counts. I scanned the articles. The first incident in 1894 killed 3 people. In 1923, 5 victims. The 1947 attacks claimed 8 lives. It's getting stronger, Danny said. Each time it feeds, it grows more powerful. As afternoon faded to evening, Danny's condition worsened. His skin was pale and cold to the touch, but he didn't seem bothered by the freezing temperature. His fingernails looked longer, sharper, and he kept talking about the meat we'd found in the mine. It looked fresh, he said for the 10th time. Maybe we could go back, just to check. Danny, that was human flesh. So, we're starving up here. No one would know. The way he said it made my blood run cold. This wasn't the eager, young ranger I'd met yesterday. Something was changing in him, something wrong. That night I took first watch. Danny fell asleep quickly, but his rest was troubled. He muttered and groaned, making sounds that weren't quite human. In the firelight, I could see his teeth were getting longer. Around midnight, I heard movement outside the station. Footsteps in the snow, but too heavy to be human. Something was circling our shelter, testing for weaknesses. I woke Danny, or tried to. He sat up immediately, alert and focused. His eyes reflected the firelight like an animal's. "It's here," he whispered. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. We waited, weapons ready, but nothing happened. After an hour, the sounds moved away. In the morning, we found the tracks. The same enormous footprints from the mine, forming a perfect circle around the ranger station. But here's what scared me most. Danny went outside and stood in one of the tracks, and his boot fit perfectly in the heel section. Whatever that thing was, it was still growing. By the 3rd day, I knew Danny was lost. He'd stopped eating regular food entirely, claiming it made him sick. Instead, he kept talking about going back to the mine, about the fresh meat we'd left behind. His appearance had changed dramatically. His skin was gray and corpse-like. His fingernails had become claws, and his teeth were sharp as razors. But the worst part was that he still sounded like Danny, still cracked jokes and shared memories from his childhood. The transformation was taking his body but leaving his mind partially intact. "I can't help it, Mac," he said as we prepared to descend into the mine again. He'd insisted we go back, and in his condition I was afraid to leave him alone. "I'm so hungry it hurts, like my stomach is eating itself." "We'll get you help. There's got to be a medical explanation." He laughed, but it sounded more like a growl. "You know what this is. Your grandmother probably told the same stories mine did. Every culture has them because they're true." I'd brought extra ammunition, this time, and a military-grade flamethrower I'd requisitioned years ago for controlled burns. If Danny was right about the Wendigo curse, fire was supposed to be the only thing that could stop them. The mine felt different this time, warmer, like something massive was breathing down in the depths. Our footsteps echoed strangely, and I kept hearing other sounds, whispers, movement, the scrape of claws on stone. "It knows we're here," Danny said. He was walking straighter now, more confident. "It's been waiting for us." We made our way back to the main chamber. The bone arrangements had changed, forming new patterns I didn't recognize, and in the center of the nest, sitting like a throne, was the largest skull I'd ever seen. Human, but elongated, with massive jaw muscles and teeth like a shark's. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Danny whispered. That's when I realized he was gone. The thing wearing Danny's face turned to me with yellow eyes and smiled, showing rows of pointed teeth. "Thank you for bringing me home," it said, in Danny's voice. The original Wendigo emerged from the shadows behind the throne, 12 feet tall, impossibly thin, with skin like old leather stretched over a skeleton. Its eyes burned like hot coals, and when it opened its mouth, I could see down its throat into darkness. But the most horrible thing was that it spoke with voices I recognized. My squad members from Vietnam, calling my name, asking why I'd left them behind in the jungle. "Marcus," it said in Corporal Johnson's voice, "you let us die. You ran when we needed you most." The psychological assault hit harder than any physical blow. My hands shook as I raised the flamethrower. These weren't my ghosts. This thing was using my memories against me. "You're not them," I said. The Wendigo laughed with my daughter's voice. "Daddy, why don't you love me anymore?" Danny circled behind me, moving with a human grace. I was trapped between two monsters, one ancient and powerful, the other newly born but still retaining human cunning. "The hunger goes away, Mac," Danny said. "Once you feed, it all makes sense. We're not the monsters here. We're evolution. The next step." I triggered the flamethrower. Fire filled the chamber, turning the darkness orange and red. The Wendigo shrieked and retreated deeper into the tunnels, but Danny stood his ground. The flames washed over him, and I watched his transformed features burn away to reveal my young partner underneath. "Thank you," he whispered, with his dying breath. The ancient Wendigo roared from the depths of the mine, a sound that shook rocks from the ceiling. I could hear it coming back, angrier now, and I knew the fire wouldn't stop it a second time. I ran for the explosives I'd seen in a side chamber. Old mining charges left behind decades ago. My military training kicked in as I rigged them with timer fuses. If I couldn't kill this thing, maybe I could bury it. The Wendigo caught up to me just as I finished setting the charges. Up close, it was even more horrible. Not just large, but wrong in every proportion. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent in impossible directions, and its face was a nightmare of hunger and hate. It spoke in my ex-wife's voice. "You never came back from that war, Marcus. You died over there with the rest of them." I met its burning eyes. "Maybe I did, but I'm taking you with me." The charges exploded. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed in Charleston, West Virginia. The doctor said a search party had found me half frozen at the mouth of a cave system 5 miles from the Seneca mine. Severe hypothermia, they said, and exposure psychosis from being lost in the tunnels. The mine had collapsed completely, a geological instability, according to the official report. They sealed the whole area with concrete and declared it permanently off-limits. Danny Fairmont was listed as killed in a cave-in accident. His body never recovered. I tried to tell them what really happened. But nobody believed me. Post-traumatic stress, they said. Hallucinations brought on by extreme cold and isolation. The Army doctors had said similar things about my flashbacks from Vietnam. But I know what I saw down there, and I know it's not dead. I left the Park Service after that, started working as a private investigator specializing in missing persons cases in wilderness areas. Over the years, I've found patterns, disappearances that cluster around old mining operations, always in harsh winters, always involving partially eaten remains. I keep an arsenal of incendiary weapons in my truck. Flamethrowers, white phosphorus grenades, military-grade thermite charges. People think I'm paranoid, but paranoia is just pattern recognition when you've seen the real monsters. Last month, I got a call from a sheriff in Colorado. Mining crew had found tracks near an abandoned silver mine, 20-inch footprints pressed deep into frozen ground. I'm driving out there next week, because here's what I learned in those tunnels beneath Blackwater Falls. The Wendigo curse doesn't die with the creature. It spreads like an infection, carried in the stories we tell and the fears we harbor. Every time someone desperate enough eats human flesh, every time civilization fails and hunger takes control, another one is born. The mines are full of them now, a whole network of tunnels and caves stretching across the Appalachian Mountains, connected by underground rivers and forgotten passages. They're growing stronger with each feeding, more intelligent with each generation. And winter is coming again. If you ever find yourself near an abandoned mine, remember this. Never trust the darkness to stay empty, and never trust your hunger to stay human. Fire is humanity's oldest weapon, But sometimes even fire isn't enough. The mountains are patient. They've been here longer than us, and they'll be here after we're gone. But the things living underneath them, they're not patient at all. They're just hungry.